and prioritization. So the conversations that Josh and Paki and I have had revolve around attempting to explore some known tools that are in existence and in regular use within the region, and then to kind of look at how those may apply, and then any others that members of the committee may know of or wish to introduce, followed by some conversations about the data that will be needed to actually use those tools. So measurements of some of the guiding principles that we have as a committee, how we will be able to decide if we're meeting or exceeding goals that have been established and the like. This is so that we can bring back a recommendation to the committee, full committee, and utilize that both individually and as a committee to allow for good discussion and establishment of priorities as we work toward the end of this year to get our initial project list together and work on the other parts of the plan that the board will start or has obviously started discussing and has committed to provide to us in time for our overall schedule to be met. So let's move right into our agenda, which is really just one item, which I tried to set up a moment ago. And I believe Paki and Josh both have some things to lead us in as far as conversations regarding these tools and aspects of it. So Paki, I assume you want to kick it off?
Yes, thank you, Tom, and welcome everyone. It's nice to see all of you. And once again, if you missed it, we have some representatives from some of our jurisdictions with us this afternoon that are listening in and will chime in if needed, and or may ask questions. So thanks everyone for your availability. Before I turn it over to Josh Pope, who will be going into the actual evaluation tool discussion, I just have a quick overview to go over with all of you. So the project tool evaluation process, as Tom mentioned, the purpose of this working group, and this is your first meeting, obviously, is to learn about the existing rating tools that you're going to be reviewing, rating, and this is to refine the RTA Next project list and to discuss potential metrics for ranking. The goal is to have a consensus building effort that's going to require buy-in from the TMC, the RTA board, as well as the full CAC. And then the evaluation process must meet the future RTA plan component requirements, which I'll quickly go over. And these future RTA plan components requirements include must aligning with the state laws and adopted policies by the RTA board. They require that project needs correspond to the measurable goals, such as safety and congestion, those sorts of things, for the state audit of the RTA plan delivery. It also includes items that are ineligible for RTA funding will not be funded by RTA revenues, such as utilities, floodplain improvements, non-transportation related enhancements, those sorts of things. Ineligible items shall not be considered under the RTA plan goals. And then, of course, you all know this, but all of this must conform to the RTA statutes. Identify named corridors and define the transportation problems, goals, and needs for each corridor must be addressed. Determine the mix of alternative transportation modes, those that are appropriate for the development and that are consistent with the transportation goals and needs for each of the corridors. And then, of course, to determine the impact of the plan on air quality, with one of the goals of the plan is improving the air quality. And then there are adopted regional policies I want to make sure you're aware of. Once the RTA next plan is drafted, then the RTA board is going to review that to ensure that the plan conforms with the statutes and policies. Federal policies don't apply since the RTA is an independent taxing district with its own funding source. But however, local policies only apply during project implementation, and they also do not apply to the regional project evaluation. So there's some regional policies that we'll work through as we move forward with this. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Josh, who's going to start talking about some examples of evaluation and frameworks. Josh.
Thank you, Paki. Let's jump in. So an overview of kind of the layout that we're working with is this framework, and it's a framework that we've used. It's a framework that we've set up the system to be prepared for. And it's one that ADOT has used. It's very similar in nature to what the city of Tucson used with Move Tucson, and it's what we used in 2018 with our RMAP, our long range plan. So the idea being you have a performance target or goal, right? And you'll just step through that exercise. You have that performance target. The next thing is like, well, you know, what's that performance measure? What's the data that helps us look at how we're performing, tracking towards that target? So I kind of include one step here, but it's kind of a two-step process. One, you have the data, and then what's that assessment of that data? Is a low number good or is a low number bad? You know, so and just generally speaking, that's that performance measure. How is that goal or target measured? So that's the data piece. And then once you have that assessed data, that performance measure, you're able to put a weight on it. So, you know, there's a number of different ways of doing this, but you can have a total of 100 points. And if you have 10 categories or 10 performance areas, you know, starting point could be everybody gets 10 points and, you know, a max performance. But if you wanted to kind of weight or prioritize one performance target or goal higher than the other, you can maybe give that performance goal a max of 20 points to kind of infer the group's values, the committee's values. So that weighting component helps kind of express the intent. While it's important, it may not be as important as some of the other goals that are on a list. And those pieces combined helps you get to that score. And so once you stack up a number of those performance targets and goals, you know, you can get to that composite score. And so that general flow of what's that goal, what's data that helps you assess how well the project is fulfilling that goal, or has the potential to address that goal. Maybe if we're looking at existing conditions, that's kind of a lot of the set that we deal with. What is the potential to have an impact on this performance area? And then, you know, how does that weight come into play if, say, you know, reducing congestion is the highest one, or reducing safety is the high, or, you know, improving safety is the highest weight that can be reflected there's the highest value that can be reflected in those weights. And that's a way that these systems can work. Or if you want to treat them all equally, you can treat them all equally. Each project is going to be assessed by that data. So if there are no safety issues on a corridor, it's not really going to have a potential to improve safety. Is kind of the construct. Or if there's no congestion on a corridor, you're not really helping fulfill the goal of reducing congestion in that corridor. So there's not going to be the potential for getting a lot of points in that category. So that's kind of the general flow. You have you get these individual scores, and you can then move towards a composite. This makes a little bit more sense when you see it in action. And so I'm going to kind of step into what ADOT is using, and they've just last couple of weeks are kind of going around with the most recent planning to programming exercise and some of their breakdowns. And what they've done is they've actually they've created 4 different regimes, scoring regimes for these 4 different areas, because within each one of these buckets, they are evaluating pavement preservation projects against pavement preservation projects, right? They're not going to take a project from this list and compare it to a modernization project list. So they've, and they have a number of criteria for each one of these buckets. And you can kind of see that this high level investment that they've made across the board, that's a way of conveying value, right? That's a high level policy thing, something that we're waiting for from the RTA board conceptually with our buckets. But then this high level scoring, they've broken it down into technical, district, and policy. So let's just step into each one. So in this example, they have these performance targets. Now, these are their targets that are tied to their federal and state requirements. As Paki mentioned, RTA is not going to be subjected to that, but it can be those, as we look at the RMAP goals and targets, they can be used as a guide. We're going to want to try to help the region reach these, but we're not restricted to them, explicitly. We're not governed by them explicitly, I guess is what I meant to say. So their performance target is getting interstate, the percent of the interstate pavement in good condition up to 44%. And what's the data measure that they're going to be looking at? They're going to be looking at internal roughness index, cracking and rutting, and deterioration factor. So this is that data, that PM, that measure. And overall, the weight of that data piece is going to be 51. So that's kind of a pretty heavy weight in their system. They've also incorporated, it's a little less data driven, but it's still data driven, right? It's still a scale, it's still a piece of information, is the just district engineer evaluation. And so that's really going to kind of come in for that that district level input, because they have the state level kind of scope, but they want to make sure they're listening to their local partners, their district engineers. And then,
so Josh,
yes,
excuse me, just to kind of internalize this a little bit, or consider it in our specific context, would you think then that district may be somewhat equivalent to local jurisdictions input about a specific project, that is
right,
how they see the project? I don't know that it would be 45%
right,
or any
right,
other number, but
right,
kind of a similar thought that you get, an outside view from the stakeholder most engaged in that project itself.
exactly. In the RMAP example, we have jurisdiction priority, and that kind of covers, so similar,
Okay, good.
And then on the policy side here, so that, accounts for 96% of the total score. They have a policy side, and 1% goes towards external funding contribution, and then 3% goes towards the transportation disadvantaged communities. So that's getting at that equity, that Justice 40 US DOT's initiative. And so they've been able to incorporate it, and there's data behind that. There are census tracts that the feds have pushed out for that. And so that's where they've integrated into their cycle. And so this is an example. So all the pavement pres projects are going to be evaluated against this, largely driven by data. And then second, largely followed by what's the district seeing as kind of their priorities, and getting that kind of engineering feedback and then those other two pieces of policy side. Going into the next one is bridge preservation. And again, they have that kind of performance target or goal. They have that federal requirement looking at NHS bridge condition being in good condition of National Highway System. NHS, 52% of the bridges are in good condition. What do we need to get there? We're looking at bridge. And actually this measure is the same measure, like the pavement and bridge PMs, we align to those with in our assessment criteria as well. They're weighting 60% of the overall score based on that data. The district engineering evaluation is coming in at 30%. And then they have some other policy related ones. So they want to pay attention to where there's freight. So this is a way of identifying a freight, a data set that represents the proportion of freight vehicles there. So that's, an expression and representation of their values. Functional classification, that's kind of vague, but it's going to be like, I would imagine they're going to be embedded within that functional classification. They would probably be prioritizing higher level functional class. So your state facility or your interstate facilities, your freeways, your arterials collectors, kind of going down to the smaller facilities. And then that external funding contribution, and then the transportation disadvantaged communities are holding strong at 4% of the overall 100%. And then if you look at modernization, again, it kind of steps through that performance target, the measure that they've identified. Here they have and I got to be honest with you, I don't really know all the details here, but the technical component, I'm not sure what's going into that one, but it's 35%. They had that district engineer coming in, and as part of modernization, safety is taking up a big chunk, and they have a level of safety service. We have a level of safety service. Our PAG RTA has developed the level of safety service is driven by our safety performance functions. I believe theirs is developed slightly differently, but ultimately, how well is this facility performing on safety? I would argue ours is a very good one, and I'm honestly, I'm just not sure if ADOT has their SPFs developed for the full state. I think there was an attempt to get there, but I don't think they are where we are, but they might be. And then the policy components, paying attention to freight, makeup, the functional class, and that hasn't really changed for their modernization. And in this expansion, they have another set. So level of service that's going to get towards congestion, average system speed, travel time, reliability. So you get at some system reliability, cost effectiveness. That's going to be looking at, well, is this a $2 billion project that's going to do a little bit of good, or are we going to get, trying to make some sense to that? New permanent jobs created is another economic development. So there are a lot of different PMs, that performance measures that you can consider bringing in, but it's just thinking about where's that data coming from, that data, and how are we going to be able to consistently get that to representative across the entire region. ADOT has that concern across the state, and here they have they're folding in their LOSS as well, and they're keeping their policy content the same. So that those are 4 examples of kind of different breakouts by ADOT. With where'd it go? With PAG in 2018, our long range plan was adopted in 2020, but the bulk of the work was done in 2018 in getting this project list together and looking at these goals and getting the data together. And we're aligning to those federal FAST Act requirements and state requirements, and the performance goals are adopted by regional council and are aligned with those state targets and goals, driven by those federal targets and goals. That being said, these are our RMAP goals. It's the data that we folded into the RTA Next process as a point of reference. We're not beholden explicitly to that because the RTA funds don't have to fully align with it, but it will help our region overall meet those goals and targets. So it's a good point of reference. It's our best available data, but we don't, anyhow, our hands aren't entirely tied there. So this configuration, this is the project platform that we had for our RMAP exercise. It's the list of the projects. We have our assessment, our performance measures here. And then what we added in that long range planning exercise for RMAP 2045 is we added a couple of additional scores. And so I wanted to start with this to kind of help you all conceptualize what an end product might look like of this effort. Because we have this kind of framework, we have this at our disposal. And so, being able to kind of place a score kind of within the context of the RTA Next portal is something that's very, very achievable, but we hadn't really stepped through that because we hadn't had this conversation yet, right? So I'm gonna step through what this score is. And we actually, if you can see, we have a score 1, 2, and 3. We had those because we were engaging our technical committee, most of which, or a good portion of which, are on the call today as the TMC representatives, designated representatives. We were going to them and say, hey, which one of these scoring regimes do you like? And they're like, well, we like parts of all of them, so we kept all of them. But we have this document, and I'll dig in, and in each one of these has a different construct. So let me get into the first score. And so what we came up with was this weighting regime, right? The scoring regime here, where pavement could get a max of 10 points. Bridges could get a max of 5. Safety for intersections could get a max of 10. Roadway could get a max of 10. And so on and so forth for system performance, for intersection congestion, current roadway congestion, future roadway congestion, sidewalk presence. And that was kind of a proxy for not only multimodal access related issues, but just general modernization. If the sidewalks were poor along a corridor, it hadn't really been there. There are probably some other issues there, right? And then environmental impact, we kind of touched on a little bit. Is it in a wildlife corridor? Is this project going through an important riparian area as it relates to Pima County's wildlife habitat conservation plan? And then freight reliability, the economic development components of, if a truck is going to be, if freight is expecting a 30-minute drive time from point A to point B, how consistently can they leave and complete that task in 30 minutes? So how reliable is access on our network? And so we have that. That's that reliability value. And as I didn't really step through, these are all tied to those federal performance targets and those thresholds that I'd kind of stepped through with that performance report. That's how we get to the red, yellow, green of the different data. So this is just kind of jumping almost past that up to that first step of here are our performance measures, and then this is how we're going to consider the weights.
So Josh,
yes, please
just
interrupt me.
Yeah, while we're on this one, just take one as an example and walk me through it a little bit. The sidewalk presence.
Right.
Let's say that you're upgrading a roadway that already has curbs and sidewalks, and the work that you're going to do is different. It might be a road diet, or it might be completion of a complete streets situation where perhaps landscaping and new pavement and, smart street type enhancements might happen there. Sidewalk presence is worth 10 in that case, but it already has sidewalks. How would you grade that?
So that it wouldn't get those points because it would be green, and so right here, these two examples, sidewalk presence, only 1% of this project corridor has sidewalks.
Right.
And so it is getting, if it had no presence of sidewalks, then it would get the full 10 points. Here, 27% of this corridor has sidewalks, so it's getting 7.3. So in the case in which a project extent had sidewalks, it would be 0 or 100, and the sidewalk presence would be green, and it would get 0 points.
Okay. And then as you look through the other scoring options, we can perhaps use this same thought process about how it gets graded under that scoring option, and we can see that kind of difference. I see Kevin and Beth both have questions. I think Kevin is number one.
Thanks, Tom. Let's see. If I'm understanding this correctly, what we are evaluating here is existing deficiencies of a potential project. And we're assuming that the project will actually address these deficiencies, correct?
Right.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure that, so we're not, So basically this is, if it's an existing corridor, these are basically scoring the deficiencies.
And the potential to improve poorly performing emphasis areas that we want to pay attention to, right?
Okay.
Did that cover
that answers my question? I just wanted, that was my assumption. I was just making sure that I was reading this correctly.
Okay. I think Beth is up, and then Moss. Beth?
So, not trying to overcomplicate this, but let's say I have a corridor that has 3-foot sidewalks.
Mm-hmm.
Does that count as not having sidewalks? Because we know that that's not adequate for ADA or anything else.
Right.
Or does it count as it gets a 1, or does it get, how does something like that? Because there's a lot of things that kind of fall into that category, that it's there, but it's substandard.
Right. So I think that gets to a great question about data. And when we want to be able to measure a goal or a target, we need to think about valuable, what is a meaningful data set, and what data is accessible that that isn't going to require a significant amount of time to get, generally, or cost. So, I know there are certain ADA exercises that are some of the jurisdictions have been able to step through, and they have very rich data sets, but that content isn't necessarily available across the region, right? So we may have to take the best available data for the given extent of projects. And this particular sidewalk presence data set is an older data set. And if I knew more about this data set, I would be able to tell you whether or not a 3-foot sidewalk was considered the presence of a sidewalk. I believe it was. I believe it was considered, there is a sidewalk there. It may, and so I don't know, but it may not meet the current ADA standards. And I would have to look that up for you. I don't know. But I would bet that it would be showing up in the data as there's a sidewalk presence, but it's deficient. And just kind of following your line of that question a little bit further. Well, what are the driveway slopes? What are the corner ramp slopes? How are they performing, right? I would imagine that, I know those weren't considered in that sidewalk inventory exercise. And that's why additional efforts in 2015 from at least the city and the county in 2018 to look at those ADA issues were required, because that information didn't exist. And I think Oro Valley had one kind of in that time frame. But again, I'm just now continuing to talk. So did that answer enough for your question?
Yeah, it answered my question for now. I may touch back.
Yeah, I mean, we need to have an understanding of what the data is, what the performance is, what is the goal that we're looking to address? What data do we have access to that can help us assess that performance goal or target, and making sure everybody feels comfortable with what that data is and what it isn't. And we're not going to be able to have we're always going to want better data no matter what.
Well, I guess in that regard, I guess maybe that's part of my question, is that if I'm this particular jurisdiction, I might have particular, additional data, and I'm looking at this going, hey, you gave me 4 here, and I really think it should be a 2 based on this additional information. I mean, as long as that discussion can happen, that that's why this is one of the projects. It's because we know that this is sufficient.
And that's kind of where, like in the ADOT example, there was the district engineer policy group of points. In this exercise, with the RMAP exercise, we had 15 points for the jurisdiction priority. So we would want to fortify some of this with other kind of catches. Moss, I believe you were next, and then Brian again, and then Eva.
Well, this is very cool, and I also love the questions that are coming up already. To Kevin's question, is it possible to factor in to this? I know these are specifically saying the existing conditions weighting. I'm wondering, it would be really cool, and maybe this isn't quite a question, but to factor in what are the assumptions of the project and how well will it address those existing conditions?
So that we took a stab at that. I mean, that's going to be a qualitative component at this planning level stage. We took a stab at that in asking our partners when they submitted the projects to see how well their projects addressed the existing conditions. And if you go into the project platform, you have access to the full project submittal of what our partners, many of whom are on this call, and how much they hated that exercise. Come on, Catherine, why don't you say anything? And just how, I mean, like, of course we're going to address safety, and so we attempted to get at that, but like, yeah, we see that there's a bridge. This is, and I shouldn't even call out Catherine. I just wanted to call out Catherine, I guess. An example of a project that is likely not in the list, but just say there was a poorly performing bridge on a project extent, and their project was going to be doing something else. Like that's where that information would come up. That didn't take place, but those are concerns, and so we asked our partners to share how well they feel their project's addressing the existing conditions. We also asked them how well is their project addressing the original CAC goals. So you'll see that information when you click on the blue. So the blue text are hyperlinks, right? And so there's one on the project name that gives you that 10-page PM report, and the other one is the cost, and that cost will give you the project level details that goes into these details. So, and at this stage of the exercise, it's a relatively qualitative component, and it's getting at that intent getting into details of, you know, what investments are going to have what type of an impact, that needs to be further down the line on project development in terms of like project engineering and design level, you know, different stages of design. At this stage, that's kind of a tough task.
Sure. So I'm picking on sidewalks again.
Sure.
You know, I mean, I think that there's, you know, I definitely understand that some of these metrics are going to have qualitative inputs. Totally understand. But I think there are some things like, will it have a sidewalk, period? You know, is there a sidewalk now, and will there be a sidewalk? And how can those very discrete pieces get folded in there? And if there isn't planning for a bike lane or sidewalk, then how can we understand that? And
and so you know, when you look at those projects, because you have all this time to look at every individual project, all that information is in there. There's that project level description of what they're going to do, and often there's kind of a bit of a boilerplate, you know, and all of the current RTA projects are multimodal in design, right? There's a bikeway, a sidewalk, all of that's baked in. So there's kind of a gold standard of what's expected out of a corridor and we're talking about named corridor projects. That's kind of an expectation of, you know, minimum level of delivery. So yeah, if there's deficient sidewalks, I guess the point of, so say we have a PM, a goal that says we want to improve, you know, pedestrian accessibility, and there's some that are similar to that, and we have a project list that has all of them say, hey, these already have sidewalks. And then, but there's 20 down here that none of them have sidewalks. That's kind of this threshold of what we're seeing, of what we're able to determine from this data point. Like, oh, well, do you want, if that is an emphasis of yours, if that's a performance that you want to move the dial on, maybe you should look at the projects that don't have any sidewalks and think about incorporating those. Or if, and you know, across the board, you know, with safety, with congestion, so on and so forth. You know, did that get to where you were going?
It does, and I'm just this is more of like a statement for us to consider down the road too, of like what are, for example, the pedestrian accidents, because we know that just having a sidewalk doesn't actually mean it's safe. And so we're thinking about that and trying to figure out how, because the one thing I'm imagining that when we grow this up to the broader CAC is, to your point, we're all going to have time to sit here and read through, you know, over 1,000 pages of technical documentation about these projects to inform our assessment. And so having this type of summary is going to be a very helpful way for us to synthesize, understand at a glance, likely going into some of the detail, but and then
that's why I made it red, yellow, green.
Yeah, exactly.
10 cells.
So I know you're on it, Josh. I can tell, and just like, but being able to filter it, and so like having as much of those other components that are feeding in of is it going to be really is it already dangerous even though the sidewalk is there, and therefore there is some kind of actual fundamental design change that needs to occur. Would be a bit helpful signal, I think.
And getting back to Brian's question, like we're rolling with the assumption that we're going to fix that, you know, like, hey, we're seeing something wrong here, and the jurisdictional partners have also acknowledged that, and that, yeah, they're looking to deploy a solution. You know, Brian, and you had your hand up, and so did Ava, and Ava hadn't had a chance to talk yet, but you pulled your hand down. Did your question get answered, or?
I mean, kind of, you know, what you had said previously about composite scores. Right. Like, I mean, I think that there is a possibility that we might have data that, like we're talking about, is incomplete or somehow doesn't capture the whole picture. But, you know, if it's, for example, a site that we're really familiar with, we might say, actually, I disagree with kind of like the score that was auto-generated by the data input. But
Right.
because we're doing composite scoring, we would be able to, score it differently based on our own observations of the project, and then be able to, I would hope, have a conversation about that when we are determining kind of like what the final scores end up looking like.
Yeah. That's a slippery slope, right? I mean, it's you want to have a data-driven I guess there's an assumption that we want to have a data-driven exercise if we're looking at performance-based planning and programming here. And so where we can incorporate, we need to think about how we want to incorporate more qualitative feedback in, either through that district engineer or, we need to think about how to do that in a way that's not like, well, they say the last 5 years of safety data doesn't say it's safety, but I feel like or rather the safety data doesn't say it's a bad safety issue, but I think it's a safety issue.
Josh,
we may
I
want
think
to try to avoid those conversations, right?
Well, I think that the one thing I'll push back on is that like lived experience is a key data point, just as much as that qualitative input from the technical manager or whomever would be. That I think that there's what is an engineer believe or see and assess versus what is a community physically experience.
And one thing, Tom, and I at the end we talked about this composite score. At the end we're going to have a number. Okay, we can then sort this list on, based on that number, and then we can say, well, let's look at everything above 63 or whatever the heck that number, that threshold is. And then we can see, well, all the projects above 63 align with that data-driven exercise. But what's missing? What do we want? So I mean, there are different ways to incorporate that feedback.
The other thing that I want to bring up as a bit of a fail-safe too is that, I think it would be ideal if we could, as a committee, do individual scoring on our own and then come back together and review the scoring to see, is it happening? Are we seeing consistency? Are we seeing patterns? Then at that point we would say, okay, let's have a conversation about why we're all saying this score differs from the data so much.
Are you suggesting individual weights?
I'm not sure how the weighting would break out, but I envision a process where all of the committee members are in an online, database with all of the plans going through a checklist where they are scoring for different fields, right? A composite score that's based on, the data that's automatically kind of generated, and then also their own kind of evaluation of different areas, especially since if you've looked, I don't know if you've looked at what the framework and goals looks like now. I mean, there are a lot of elements there or topics there that are, I don't know that we have data, that we can just easily input in order to spit out a score for. There's going to be a lot of things that I think are a bit more squishy than that.
I agree. There's a lot of squishy goals. I think that would be worth discussing with the committee. This is what I was hoping to get through was to demonstrate to you all what this kind of performance-based, data-driven, not data-dictated, right? It's data-driven performance-based planning. This is kind of the state of the practice with this framework. And so, thinking about getting consensus or getting everybody fill out how they would want to weight a set of performance measures. Once we have that list of performance measures as they align with the CAC goals as best as they can, you know, we may be looking at a, hey, we have a kind of a base set from the long range plan, and we can see how that base set of performance measures, how the projects perform there. We can see how the CAC weights those, and then there may be an auxiliary set of performance measures that help fill in some of the gaps that maybe some of these data points aren't necessarily where your current goals aren't being captured by some of the long range plans performance measures.
Josh, I think also these different scoring options, we may land on one, or we may want to cross-reference some of the others, because they do typically deliver slightly different to sometimes greatly different results, just dependent on, you know, where that focus is placed. And I think it'd be good if you could go through those and kind of just explain what those were and sort of how they give different results. But Brian's still got his hand up, and
go with Brian.
Hand's getting tired, I'm sure.
Sure.
Thank you, Tom. I appreciate the concern. Just a question for you. We picked on sidewalks enough, so I'm going to bring this up. So to the point, let's say I understand fully that anything project that is really coming through to RTA or CAC, the jurisdictions know we want to address all modes of transportation as we do that project. So bus pullouts, sidewalks, you know, bike paths, roadway,
right.
Divided medians, the whole thing. So that's in there. How do you capture some of this looking at these examples? What if one of those factors, what if a sidewalk is in place, it is perfectly effective, efficient, it doesn't need to be changed and won't be impacted by this project? Does it just get no points then, and it comes down, even the score comes down, even though it's already adequate?
Right.
Okay.
You're not, this investment of this project isn't going to help improve regionally sidewalk access, because it's already good.
So I'm saying the roadway project there may be really, really good reason why a roadway project needs to be done. But because the sidewalk is already so offset and it's in place, there's no need to tear up a perfectly good sidewalk just to put another one in. But I wasn't sure how that would be.
So it's likely going to be performing very well on, you know, poor congestion, you know, but it's not going to get points on the sidewalk emphasis area.
Okay, very good.
Yeah. And I'm sorry, Brian. I'm sorry I jumped over you because you did not talk earlier.
That's
I apologize.
I did
Kevin.
I did not feel it was malicious in any way, Josh. You're giving me credit for all of Kevin's questions.
My bad.
I was going to take them. So.
Okay, so here we have first scoring criteria is looking at the total number of transportation issues addressed. And we have two examples of like two conceptual projects here. And they're different performance, you know, on different portions of the network. And so they have different kind of color coding. In this option one kind of says, hey, let's look at all the performance areas. This is a high priority, project one is a high priority capacity project that touches on all existing conditions. Project two is a medium priority non-capacity project that does not affect bridges or have freight activity. So this is what, I mean, this kind of answered some of those questions of like, well, you know, there's no bridge, but it's getting, there's no bridges in that project extent. So it gets a 0. But there are no bridges in this other project extent, so it gets a 0 as well. The current roadway and future roadway here in project one, this project is looking to address capacity issues. This project two is not going to be addressing capacity. So these two areas don't really come into play. So those points don't get built in. So we are looking at kind of having that performance not count in these situations. So, but we're giving a tally looking across all of them, and this one, because it's attempting to address all of them, is getting a higher score, and this one, because it's not, is getting a lower score. So the second example is looking at share of relevant issues addressed. So option 2 scores projects on a 100-point scale based on the share of relevant issues addressed. That is, issues addressed for which data are available or relevant to the project description. And so this just looks to kind of weight what those, it's the same set of conditions, but because it's able to, it's intending to kind of not take away points because those existing don't exist, those facilities don't exist. And I'm sorry, I'm not doing a great job of explaining it, but basically where this bridge doesn't exist in both of them, well, this project isn't really looking at it, so it's not counted against it. So where previously this project scored 44 points, now that it's more of a relative score based on the available conditions, it performs a little bit better. And so, and actually, you know, whereas this one stays the same because it's addressing all of them. I'm going to move into the third one, which kind of takes that construct and then adds essentially cost into the equation, cost estimate and project length. And so that's us, that was an attempt to get at a benefit cost ratio. So how many poorly performing areas are you addressing with this project, and how big of a project is it, and what's that? So normalizing the cost by the size of the project, and then being able to look at how many of the performance areas are you addressing. So this one's a little bit more complicated, a little more sophisticated, but all three of these different regimes can help get at it. So even if you have one kind of weighting that gets at the committee values, there are ways to interpret either at the full impact, impact across, the relative impact, or the relative impact with cost and incorporated. And I would argue that Patrick Hartley, when he made these three, this is an evolution of his thoughts on what would be the best way of doing it. And he ultimately landed at option 3, but he kept the first 2 in place as a way to have a more kind of easier to consume way of looking at it. So basically it boils down to, there's a lot of different ways to look at this. We have this data currently available. And at the end of the day, it's going to give you a number. That number can be used to help drive decision-making, not dictate your decision-making, you know, and incorporate some other discussion and dialogue as you step through the process. Eva?
I'm really interested in what possibilities for adding data sets that maybe aren't currently part of this tool. You know, how does that work? Like, let's say we wanted to add census data about income or race and ethnicity, and be able to map that and be able to use that to identify some equity targets.
So there are ways, and I mean, that kind of gets to that first kind of those kind of 4 steps, like, you know, what's that performance goal or target? So what are we trying to achieve, right? And then what data can we point to that is accessible that we can leverage, and how are we going to want to assess it? I found that it's often worthwhile being able to point to others' work, where if say the feds have broken down a Justice 40 initiative, equity in census tracts, then maybe we lean on that. That could be something that we look at in considering the goal and principle of thinking about equity. But then the question comes in, well, how are we going to assess it? So I think that's my understanding is that's part of what this working group is brought together for. And so we would have to then evaluate each of these projects with these new data sets. I would argue that we have a lot of resources at your disposal with the framework that we have in place, and then appending this framework with some additional pieces to help kind of round out kind of what's missing would be a potential path forward.
Just a reminder that we've included in our guiding principles and our goals the caveat that everything needs to be measurable. So we want to make sure that as we go through the individual goals, we establish a reasonable number of data points that we can use to inform our scoring of the effectiveness of those individual metrics, but also to make sure that we can provide a little more clarity in some of these areas that have been described earlier as fuzzy. So just a reminder that that's also part of what we'll be doing, and hopefully in a little bit we can kind of start talking about those guidelines and kind of what Josh has already got or knows of that we can get, or other partners do. And we can also weigh in then on those other ones that seem a little fuzzy about where are some sources we could go to get that kind of data. Again, if there is no data, there's really no measurement, and it's going to be difficult to defend those aspects. So it's going to be really important.
And just also to add really quickly, there may not be data for some projects because it's a brand new facility. So there's no pavement condition, there's no bridge condition, there's no safety because it's a brand new. And so, we have to think, and those are grayed out of writ large across the board for the brand new. So this method isn't going to be able to assess every single one. So you're going to have to think about how do you want to address those. I'm not sure who was next. I'm sorry.
I think I have Ava,
okay.
Perhaps with their hand still up or with another thought.
Yeah, hands down. Go ahead.
Well, first I want to say, sorry, Josh, for jumping the gun. I thought like option 1 was the thing. And so when I started asking all those questions.
No, that's cool. Everybody
option 2 is there too. So thanks for patiently letting me spin my wheels on that. But I did like, and I think these are so interesting. And then one thing I was wondering about is like thinking about our guiding principles and everything. A lot of it also has to do with about what are the impacts of these projects that are not just related to the very traditional conditions of pavement, conditions of like, I don't know, whatever, all the different conditions that we traditionally think about in transportation planning. And really focusing on what will this do to our community? How will it impact greenhouse gas emissions, air quality, how will it impact, and that's also like inequity, it relates to our map, like all these other pieces, right? And so what I'm curious is, based on my understanding of these three options, is there a potential to have an option 4 that's like projecting, saying, okay, we can assume that this would increase vehicle miles traveled by this much, or vehicles, or like distance, whatever, length of time, commute times, whatever, and trying to figure out some type of option 4 that would say, over time period, this is what we could expect for the impact on our region.
So I guess I want to kind of clarify. I was sharing examples of what we've done. We can pull one or all of them off and apply them. We don't have to have those three. I mean, this is kind of this exercise. So those were examples. I mean, I believe there's likely going to be a interest in being able to demonstrate how it aligns with our kind of current long range plan as a base kind of frame of reference. And then what this group does with its goals and policies is it can be a subset of these performance measures, or all of them, and filling in the gaps to meet it. To meet, what I see 3 to 5 other columns that could maybe help fill in the gaps, maybe 3. But to get to your question of, what's the overall impact? That's going to take, at the project level, that's going to be, we're going to have to think about meaningful proxies that the group feels comfortable with. And I mean, I'm looking at the list. We have some of our jurisdictional reps. They've been through this. It would be good to get them to chime in when we get into those weeds. But traditionally, what we do is we'll do that with the project set, and we'll run a model, and that'll take 2 weeks, and then we'll come back with the data. So that's not going to necessarily, and that's for a group of projects. So we'll be able to see some of those numbers, but not at a project by project level. But we can bring in data elements that can help guide us to selecting ones that are going to be that we know are going to have a meaningful impact towards improving different levels of performance.
I think we want to also remember that we're going to be looking at different types of projects in different jurisdictions. Some jurisdictions that are perhaps more rural are going to have different types of projects than, and even within like the city of Tucson, there are going to be various wards that have different types of needs. So I think to the extent that we can use our tool to evaluate similar types of projects and rank them against each other will give us also some idea about if we're going to have a process that, say, fully values full-blown corridor projects, then some projects can't possibly meet those needs and may end up, just because of the tool and showing as much less desirable. Whereas if we were to evaluate all of those different types against their own types, we'd be able to see relative importance and realize that those are the types of projects that belong either in a specific geographic area or as a project type that makes sense within a full plan. Kevin.
Yeah, Tom, I was gonna just basically what you mentioned. I almost think we should be evaluating the projects within their own jurisdictions. And then, I know the jurisdictions had their own ranking. That's obviously, at least ADOT included that in theirs, and probably something we should consider as ours, but we should probably be evaluating them against one another within their own jurisdictions. And I'm going to, and the way I'm thinking about it is something that's actually going to be able to be, past the voters, meaning we can't end up with a bunch of projects in one jurisdiction and none in others, because then we won't get community support. So that's why I'm thinking we almost evaluate them against one another within each jurisdiction. And then from there, determining which projects are recommended is kind of more of a what's going to pass the muster of the voters exercise.
Yeah, we'll have a lot of really robust conversations, I'm sure, about different ways to attack it. And Kevin, I agree that we need to have some real confirmation, I guess, of the priorities and understanding of the priorities of the individual jurisdictions so that we can be sensitive to those, as well as ensure that we understand them in the context of our own guidelines and goals. Mas.
Going back, Josh, to my first question, I guess the thing that I still feel like a little unclear about is, rather than, you mentioned having a package of projects that you would run through a model to assess the impact. I'm curious to understand a little bit more about why it has to be at that scale, and then it's like how you have to have that package of projects, and you can't just evaluate, for example, air quality impacts, or I'll frame it this way rather than air quality, but like specifically projected greenhouse gas emissions from a road expansion, for example. Right. Like, I feel like if you know that it's going from 4 to 8 or 6 lanes, and you have a assumed level of service that you're trying to target with that, you'll have a sense of the volume, and that would be able to turn into a greenhouse gas emission figure. And that's exactly what I was thinking about. Like, okay, there may be proxy data points that we can use at that project level, but we're not going to be able to run the EPA moves model that ensures air quality conformity at a project by project level. That's going to require the TDM, the travel demand model run, and then, to prepare the outputs of that or the inputs of the EPA moves model. So that is kind of our, air quality modeling. That's a multi-week exercise, but there may be other data considerations, other proxies that help inform the project selection that can help guide the group towards getting better performance in that ultimate model run. Mm-hmm. Okay. And that's where I was going to lean on some of the other colleagues to suggest that. And I believe Beth jumped in with her hand up. I did have another follow-up question. Sorry. No, it's okay. For Kevin, or kind of to Kevin's question about, like, could we do a internal jurisdictional evaluation review? And I guess I just want to know, like, I'd be very curious to understand what would be different within that jurisdiction, and like how, if we're merely constraining to those jurisdictional projects and stacking them up against each other, or if we're actually then changing what the metrics we're using or what we're evaluating those projects against for that given jurisdiction. So I'm just looking for a little clarity there. Yeah, I guess my thought was, no, we're not necessarily changing
how we're scoring all the projects. In other words, you could still compare project A against in this jurisdiction against project B in the other jurisdiction using the same scorecard. But what I was saying is we need to probably come up with a ranking of projects within each jurisdiction to pick from, if that makes sense. You know what I'm
I
saying?
think it does. You'd be like, okay, community X submitted 100 projects and we are going to
The top 10 or whatever.
yeah, right. Like just pick those up. Okay.
And that's where, you know, I'm like, this is just a number, you know, and so you're not just going to look at everything 63 and above. You may want to look at, well, what are in this jurisdiction, and so, you know, it's a point of reference to help you say, given this set of criteria, this is how this criteria that reflects our values, this is how well it does or doesn't perform to meet that. And that's a good example of how you could use it.
And some projects may be as expensive as 10 other projects. And so understanding kind of that third scoring option, you know, that's dollars per mile or miles per dollar or something like that may help us as well. So Beth, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, and I'm gonna pick on, I think, like the air quality one, because for me it's a low hanging target. I was going to use congestion, but they kind of tie together. I think some of the challenge of this model is you're looking very specifically at just the project, and you know, I guess tying congestion and air quality together. That if you're saying, okay, is it reducing congestion? Are we reducing congestion just on this road, or by making this a 6-lane roadway, we're reducing congestion within a half-mile radius on all the other east-west roadways or something along those lines? Like, there's no way to rate that. And then kind of to like Moss's question, well, yes, if a road's going to go from 4,000 ADT to 40,000 ADT, well, in theory, yes, there's more, emissions, but those additional 36,000 trips came from somewhere else. And if those were sitting at lights on other streets and now they're moving smoothly, yes, you have, additional emissions in one location, but overall, so without doing that overall model, you don't have an answer. So to just look at it and say, well, we've just added 36,000 trips, we must be negatively impacting our air quality. Without looking at the region as a whole, I don't think that that's a good, way to weight some of these projects, because we can't look at it to Josh's point that that's a multi-week task, and you can't look at just at one project. You have to look at them kind of as a whole. Okay, that's my rant. Sorry, I'm done.
Okay, Brian.
Well, she might be done with her rant, but I'm going to pick up where she left off on it. So I want to bring real life experience into this. I mean, INA and I-10 got redone under the current RTA, and with the at-grade rail crossing, I had a 10-minute drive and I sat and idled for 25 minutes as I waited for two very, very slow trains back to back to finally clear the intersection. So what should have been 10 minutes worth of vehicle emissions and use of gas turned into 35 minutes worth of vehicle emissions, simply because we, expanded lanes and went over the interstate and over the railroad tracks to make that more efficient and more smooth. So, I kind of see it both ways too. And now I'm to the point where I avoid Cortero at all costs because it's the exact same problem that INA was. So yes, I use INA much more now than Cortero, but that's because, to Beth's point, as a region, we fixed INA, and I would rather go down Silverville and hit INA than go anywhere near Cortero, simply because of how inefficient it is. And I know I'm going to get stuck sitting for one of the 80 trains a day that go past that crossing. So on another note, I really actually like this model and the way it's up. I understand there's going to be need for some qualitative kind of input, but for me, data should be quantitative. And that doesn't mean that's the final say. the score comes out and that's it, the ranking, we're done.
Right.
But we have more projects than we have money. So we've got to do something to narrow down. And wherever we can do the most good with the dollars we have, then we get to start as a group picking what makes sense for the region. So that's my 2 bits.
Well put, thanks.
So just kind of building on that, and I think Beth, you bring up such a great point about needing to look at the overall system, because yes, there could be, I think like it's like there could be this shuffling that is occurring, but also a lot of what the RTA is banking on and the models and projections is population growth and change and land use densification. And so that also means that you are bringing new cars in. And so it's not just this like for like shuffle right across our roadways that are going to allow that. And so I think the point of looking at an overall model too is going to be really important to just understand, seeing like, okay, well, for projecting for our region to grow in this way, that means there are going to be new cars on the roads, and we need to understand what that impact is and how that's going to play out when we have that kind of that growth. And the same thing when we're promoting a lot of this, and I know some of our guiding principles are about economic growth too. And so that's part of the driver of people coming into our community, whether it's coming down from Phoenix just for a commute or something like that. And so these are all other just like added load that's not just about moving from Grant to Broadway, right? So I think that overall system analysis is really important in understanding where that is. And I'll make another plug. I was looking at Caltrans, their induced demand methodology and some of the refinement that they've been doing on that. And they have a really robust paper looking at vehicle miles traveled and everything like that throughout the region and understanding how to assess that and factor it into their planning. So we do have some really good, to Josh's point about like, let's not reinvent the wheel. There's some really great methodologies out there and data sources for that. And I don't know, I'm excited because, a lot of the things that I know Ava brought up about like equity and factoring in, there's a lot of hard data out there, between, Justice 40, EJ Screen, there's all these different maps and such that we can reference and pull in here that are based on vetted, robust methodologies that look at our systems. And it's fortunately we're in an age of big data and there's a lot of things for us to use. And I definitely respect the wanting to like look at hard numbers, but also as a qualitative researcher, I will always make the plug about how numbers don't tell everything, and that lived experience, as we were talking about. And I think like I'm thinking about landscape architects, right? There's this joke of if you make the squiggly pathway through the park, nobody's using it, they're cutting straight through in this other direction. And so trying to understand why this thing doesn't work, or why this technically beautiful thing or technically appropriate thing won't actually meet the human needs. It's really that whole paradigm shift that we hear across all industries of what's the user-centered reality versus just the tech or the infrastructure down in like result. And that's going to really impact safety, usage, and all these other things. And so I just want us to really, I'm excited. I think that, I'm Josh, I really feel like you just have such a good vision for what's going on with this. And I'm excited to see what comes from all of it. So thank you.
Excellent.
Right.
And we have 3 more meetings to figure this out. 4 more weeks. Like
easy.
We have a
got
pretty
it.
tight time frame, is all I'm saying. So being able to deliver in something that's meaningful, I think we can do it. We have a good foundation is a main thing that I wanted to get across today. And that, with the platform and with that my team can support this exercise to help take this through. But we are going to have to focus our energy and make sure we're preparing content that is reasonable and but meaningful to get at the sentiment of your goals. And but I think we can do it. It's just a matter of how do we kind of set ourselves up for success on this. So
let me ask a general question of the committee. Are you satisfied that we can get the things that the committee needs to be evaluated out of this tool or its equivalent as we go forward? Is it looking like you can see us being successful? And remember also that this is likely not going to become part of the message to the community, but it is a part of how we logically get to a conclusion. I cannot imagine going to the voters with all of this data, just what we're seeing here, much less the 3 to 5 additional metrics that we've been talking about just today, and getting people to understand that this one scores 54.4, and if you look at it a different way, it's 74.8, and it doesn't matter. It's kind of, is this an area that I know? Have I been in this area commuting to work or trying to get to work and not having access to a vehicle? All of those issues that voters are going to be asking themselves when they look at the projects. They're not going to be looking if they live in South Tucson. They're not going to look that much at what's happening in Marana. They're going to want to know what's happening, in their area and in their commuting area as well. So, all right. Ava, did you want to weigh in?
Yeah. So, I mean, just from first impressions, what I'm thinking is that we will probably need a different evaluation tool into which these scores can feed, because there's, I just don't see how we're going to have this kind of seamless translation between, the goals and priorities that we've come up with that are about outcomes and this tool. I think that this tool will provide us with a really great base for a lot, database for a lot of what we're looking into. But I mean, can I use a tool like this, which is primarily designed to tell me about current conditions, to actually be able to tell me if this project reduces the likelihood of crashes for pedestrians, reduces the likelihood of crashes for cyclists, reduces the likelihood of crashes for wildlife, reduces, you know what I mean? Like, there are a lot of places where, I'm just not sure that it's realistic to imagine that we would be able to import giant data sets for every single thing that we want to be able to consider. You know what I'm saying? I think that they don't, the goals that we came up with and this tool don't graft onto each other perfectly. They complement, like I can see them working together in tandem, but I feel like probably we would need something more.
Okay, Brian, let's hear your comment, and perhaps we'll then ask Josh to react as well.
Well, I kind of want to answer your question with a question, right? Which is are people dissatisfied the way the current RTA projects have been chosen and rolled out? My opinion, and my opinion only, is this has been an extremely successful endeavor for this first 20 years worth of projects, which is why we're trying to extend it for another 20 years. So, there obviously were more projects presented last time than there was money for, just like we're facing. But these exact tools helped select projects that were beneficial to the entire region, and the voters, overwhelmingly stepped up and supported that. And to go back to Kevin's point earlier, is if we can't get the vast majority of voters to buy off on this, then no improvement is happening anywhere. And to the point, it's got to be spread around. And generally speaking, people care about their little corner of the world, as you said, Tom. What affects them on a daily basis? The voters are not putting in as much time, energy, effort, digging into these details as we have. I've been at this for over 3 years now. I certainly did not know nearly this amount when the first RTA came out. So I think if generally speaking, people are happy with the way RTA has been working thus far, and these were the tools that were used, then we're already on to something. I understand Ava's point, and like I said, I know there's going to be additional conversations, but we have to get to a point where we start narrowing down projects and actually looking at individual specific projects and having conversations about those. Specifically the conversations that are going to be on the bubble. Which one of these is going to make it? Because one's going to make it and what's not. But right now, we have not even begun to talk about the projects we have. And the clock is ticking, and time is our enemy at this point. So I believe if the tools worked before, I do believe this can work again. And that doesn't mean, again, it does not mean that there's not further conversation, but at least it gets us to an actual conversation level about specific projects rather than theoreticals.
And I guess I should jump in there. This tool came into existence in 2018. So this wasn't necessarily the framework in which the original RTA was designed and laid out. The current set of projects it came out of an entirely different exercise, and I'll let others more familiar with that exercise chime in on those details. This is, so to get to Ava's point with getting towards an outcome based of how well will these projects address the issues seen, that's very challenging. You picked safety and as your example, and that's probably like one of the two areas that we probably have the best information to help us get at crash modification. Excuse me, evaluating existing conditions and seeing what types of crashes exist on the facilities, and then identifying solutions and what those crash modification factors are. We have an entirely different platform to do that and integrate and show you if you make this improvement of putting in a median or putting in additional lighting, these are how many of your observed crashes you would expect to see and how many lives you would expect to see, and you have a BC rate. You can have a benefit cost ratio on that. When I mentioned earlier, the projects as described now with 3 sentences of what they expect the impact, the project descriptions, if you go into the platform and you look at how they're describing the projects, we're at a pretty high level planning stage. Those details can be better assessed once the jurisdictional partners, once the design concept report gets to 50% or gets to 70%, you can start seeing, well, what's the geometry of that intersection going to look like? We're really early on in that exercise, and getting to those 50 or 60% is a lot of money. And so unfortunately, we're not going to have the benefit of being able to articulate explicitly what the outcome based. So we're going to have to lean on, well, what's the potential to make impact? This corridor has a greater potential to improve safety because it's a poorly performing safety area. we don't want, and if your goal is to improve safety, well, then don't put money towards a corridor that doesn't have a safety issue. That's kind of the level, that in terms of data-driven, performance-based planning, that's kind of the stage that we're at with this. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally
Okay.
does. And
Okay.
and I think part of the reason why I'm like kind of, playing devil's advocate around some of the data is that, traditionally there have been certain data points that really are good at, predicting safety for drivers, but those haven't
Sure.
translated into safety for pedestrians or cyclists. Actually, it's made areas more dangerous for pedestrians and cyclists. Yet
Right.
the data based on motorized safety was the data that was taken into consideration and that decisions were made on. So, that's why I see the importance, and like you said, and I love how you said it, Josh, really, you want this to be a data-driven process and not data dictated, right? Because I'm hoping that kind of some of our human interventions can help us to like red flag when there are moments where we have a big blind spot in our data, basically.
And I think that can be, I think we can put that into a data binder. I think we can account for that, I think we can have that part of that process, similar to how ADOT has, and similar how we were able to reflect the jurisdiction priority. So I think there's room for that for sure. But defining the parameters of it is what's going to be key so that everybody's comfortable with it, right? And it's not just like, well, they wanted to tip the scale on this one because they wanted to. Well, like, no, we had a discussion, we had a process. We went through it. We had TMC members there to be able to chime in. We laying out those rules and that groundwork, I think, will help get buy-in on what that kind of qualitative component can be, because it's valuable, right? And can and should have a place.
Kevin.
Yeah, I was just going to answer your question from earlier. I do think that for most project types, this type of scoring system with some tweaking, adding of columns, et cetera, will get us there. And we might need to tweak it for different groups or buckets of types of projects.
Yeah.
The one that we'll have to think about, I think, a little bit more will be the brand new corridor projects and how to score those.
Right.
So that'll be, I don't know, different. But for most project types, I think we can get there using this framework with some tweaking. And then the other thing I was going to mention is one, I assume that we're going to do this as part of this entire RTA Next process, but I don't believe that the original RTA went out and said, here's the projects, this is it, that's it. We went out with a group of projects to the public, said, okay, these are the projects that we're considering, and then we got input on those. And I think that's maybe where we can get more to the human aspects that Ava mentioned. I assume that's going to be a similar process to what we're going to follow this year or this time.
Yeah, I'm sure it is too. We specifically showed them a draft plan and then made sure that we asked what was missing, what shouldn't be here and what's missing. And got a lot of good feedback and made some changes in the alignment of projects, but also it gave an opportunity for people to understand that the smaller projects, if you will, that irritated them so much in their commute, say lack of bus pullouts or whatever it might be, or the frequency of bus service, as an example, would not be found in those named projects, but rather would be found in one of the other categorical elements. And we could get into specifics with people so that they understood that while a new Southeastern Corridor project is one that they may drive one time a year or maybe once every 5 years. This other one is something they're going to use 5 days a week in their commute to work. So I think that also leads into a thought I wanted to put out there that I think Josh has mentioned, but I want to make sure everyone heard it. And that is that when we've completed the majority of our draft plan is together, an overall model would need to be run to say, as a complete integrated plan, this is the impact. This is what we can say about congestion or air quality or whatever outputs exist from the major those major programs that we get to run, the modeling exercise. And that's one of the reasons that you can't get good data about an individual project's impact unless you can see it in the full context of the entire plan. So, Mary.
Hi, thank you. I have to tag along with what Kevin said. He took the words right out of my head, but the other thing further is it's been so long since we had the jurisdictions come in and tell us about these projects, like 3 years or more. I think this particular tool is a good tool, but I would look forward to hearing the jurisdictions then come back and speak to us if there's time about their priorities and why their priorities are what they are. Because I think we'll hear a lot from them as the middle resource. And then of course, what you said, Tom, about going out to the public too. I think we'll be able to nail it as long as we have those 3 sources of information to help us guide us in our decisions.
Yeah, that's a great comment, Mary. Thanks. Maybe Paki, if you're still on, could weigh in on the best time for that. Presentations from those various groups.
Yeah, no, Mary, thanks for bringing that up. The TMC is actually going to be having a workshop later this month to go through their own refining process and start those discussions. So I think once they get to where they want to be, I think that would be a good time to then come back and maybe possibly have some presentations if there's time to do that. It's that iterative process that we're still going through. But
yeah, thank you for that. I think that'll make a big difference in helping us narrow our focus as well.
Yeah, and I also wanted to add to Kevin's point earlier on some of the other comments about other ways, just so that there are other scenarios that we have looked at internally that could work, but for today we wanted to make sure we present a scoring and tooling mechanism for you to start thinking about. But there are certainly many different ways to look at how to go about this, and that's another reason the TMC is going to be holding their workshop to also have those discussions. So this is a process that that's collaborative and everyone's looking at right now. This discussion today has been really, really great. So of course I was on, Tom. It's just been I've been quiet because this is really your working group, and I'm really impressed at the discussion that you've had today and with Josh's guidance. So it's been really good. Thank you.
Great. Josh, you don't have to raise your hand just because I keep butting in.
It feels weird. It felt weird, I have to admit.
Yeah.
I wanted to, there was a point that was made, and I believe someone has to jump off at 3:45, and I think Moss mentioned the future growth and how and maybe I can just take a moment to the way in which we considered future growth and how that's expressed in this what you see in front of you is we have future congestion, and there's another, if you scroll to the right when you're on the screen, there is 2045 weighted average volume. So you have a 2019 volume and a 2045 volume. That 2045 volume and that future roadway congestion is an interpretation of that volume, right? That came out of a model run in our long range plan that we worked with our jurisdictional partners through the Population Technical Advisory Committee in looking at a land use. We executed a land use model where we took the state level projections for the county, and then we split that up to see, basically what portion of that county level projection is Marana going to get? What portion is Sahuarita going to get? What's Oro Valley and unincorporated Pima County? All the jurisdictions, all of our partners, and we broke it down at a smaller geometry so we could start running our model. And what that is driven on, you mentioned density. Yes, where the adopted plans and policies want density. So for the city of Tucson, we're looking at redevelopment areas with increased density. But we aligned with the adopted plans and policies of the board of supervisors, and town councils and mayor and councils that are expressed in their general plan. So we have a growth pattern that reflects what Marana wants, and we interacted with them to get the town center with the appropriate housing and employment density that they're anticipating in the next 30 years. We worked with Sahuarita to reflect the similar, town center densities, and then, where their planned residential communities are going to be. And so we stepped through that exercise. And so I do feel, we have to do it every few years. We're about to do it again. But it's our regional best expectation of what the future is going to look like, right? And that is then interpreted into those those future congestion and future volumes. So, and I feel I helped execute that exercise, and I feel there are a lot of opportunities for all of our partners to share their perspective, and we iterated 4 different times in the summer of 2019 on that exercise. So that's embedded in all of this, is months and months of work on those 2 numbers.
And I just wanted to say one last thing before I have to jump off. And I definitely respect the huge amount of work that's gone into this process. I can see this tool is just like a beast, definitely. And thank you for, educating us on it today. It's really fascinating. I've learned a lot. When I think about future projections, though, I think about the accelerated pace of climate change, regardless of, whether or not Marana wants to grow, if it's parts of it are uninhabitable, then what I mean? I'm very concerned as
the same can be said for the city.
Right,
Tucson,
absolutely.
Right. So we're having to operate under a certain set of assumptions.
So that is kind of where I'm concerned about the assumptions that we're using, right? Because we have seen such rapid, strange changes or unanticipated changes, or changes that we didn't think were going to happen this quickly,
right?
In terms of climate, in terms of the cost of fossil fuels, in terms of the affordability of automobiles. Those are all kind of these wild cards that concern me as we're trying to make projections. But if you don't have a crystal ball, Josh, I'm really not sure how we're going to address those things.
You get the folks thinking about these across the region and how they're preparing for it, and you try to reflect the best consensus of what the group thinks is going to happen.
Right.
That's what's expressed in this data.
And I think that's my concern, is that I'm not sure that that everybody is thinking about it as seriously as they should. We haven't caught up to our reality just yet. But anyway, thank you so much. I do have to hop up. I have to pick up my child from the bus stop. So thank you, everyone.
All right. Thanks, Ava. And a reminder too that the individual jurisdictions who are responsible for building these projects and designing these projects will need to weigh in on how they design to develop that kind of output, that kind of outcome. What is it that they can do within a project that will enhance any of those individual aspects? So we do need that input from them, as Paki was saying. And I think that will help us understand how they foresee achieving some of these goals and why projects that they put in will help to meet those goals. Moss.
Yeah, I think maybe to that point, Tom, it would be helpful, and maybe this is perfect for since the TMC is having that workshop coming up, to have the jurisdictions update how the project supports the guiding principles. Okay, cool. That is great to know that's there. And I think something else that I know we're running out of time, so we could put a pin in it for our next meeting or something, but I feel like I'm having a hard time sticking with what the unit of analysis is, right? We have all this emphasis on needing to have a regional plan and a regional priorities. And I know it's a system, and I know that system is made up of segments that are going to vary and everything like that. So I understand it's complicated, but at the same time, if we're trying to be responsible with taxpayer dollars and not feed into a self-perpetuating system that needs incredible amounts of maintenance and expansion and growth in the next 20 years, there's a fiscal responsibility component to it there, I think, for our regional taxpayer dollars and what type of growth is being enabled through the use of those dollars. And so I think that's something I think I need some more clarity on, is how, and maybe this is where we're running into that wall with needing more policy direction from the RTA board, which maybe is something that we need to consider about it. If we don't have a very clear direction from the board and how we're thinking about these things, how is that going to impact our ultimate process and timeframe here? Because I just think that we're going to have this emphasis on regional projects that have this regional emphasis that is going to be accepted by the regional voter. We need to have that we need to keep that lens and not just say, well, we need to have this one connection in this jurisdiction because of whatever reason, and think a little bit about how we're balancing that input. So
yeah, like we keep saying, whenever the question comes up, or when we're actually in the room at PAG, this is where we put on our regional hat. So think regionally. Before I go to Patrick, Josh, how much more do you have in your
That's all.
presentation?
I'm sorry, I'm done. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Patrick.
Sorry about that. My computer's a little laggy. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to participate. Great discussion. Very interesting stuff. Kind of a passion of mine personally. But I just want to kind of offer up that, the city has just gone through this very exercise in the last year with the Move Tucson process. We were pulling from a lot of the same data sets and kind of confronting a lot of the same challenges that I think you're looking at this regional level. So, as you're kind of looking through some of the models that you could look to replicate, maybe there's some elements that we could offer up for Move Tucson that would be valuable to this discussion. We found ways to kind of incorporate concerns about climate change and the possibilities of mode shifts. We brought equity in as a major consideration into that planning effort, and we're able to quantify it to be able to evaluate these projects. Certainly, we understand that the criteria that you may be looking at would be different, or the interpretation of those criteria at a regional scale versus what was of interest to us and what we heard from our constituents through the Move Tucson process. But I think, methodologically, it could be fairly similar, or it could be supportive as at least a point of reference. And kind of we went through a 2 to 3 step exercise where we did an overall network screening, and we looked at that deficiency based approach and saw where those needs were. And I think Josh really hit the nail on the head. We knew safety was a major concern for us. So we wanted to really focus on those corridors that had under a poor safety performance or lower than expected safety performance. Again, with the assumption that the projects are going to be designed to address that underlying issue. So when we did the network screening, that really helped us understand where kind of the needs were on our network to address the guiding principles and the goals that we'd established through the process that we heard from the community. And then we did a second layer, which was more kind of project specific when we overlaid those onto that network after we had a better understanding of kind of those quantifiable deficiencies. But it was part of the input. Again, it wasn't data driven, again, as Josh said, but it was informative and helpful for us. I will say a major difference for the Move Tucson process is that we didn't have a fiscal constraint. So we just did a straight scoring and evaluation as a means of understanding it. We didn't have to make a hard cut at any point. That's kind of the exercise we're going through right now as we line up these projects. But that all informed the projects that we submitted to the RTA for consideration and RTA next. Sorry, I went on too long, but thanks for the opportunity.
Appreciate it. Thanks for weighing in, Patrick. At our next meeting, let's see if we can get a little more detail about that, and perhaps give us some good ideas about how to incorporate some of these issues that we've been discussing. Appreciate your offer. Okay, anything else, Josh or Paki, that we wanted to try to complete today? And then I do want to just call on the members of the committee to give us a little bit of feedback if they have any that they haven't had a chance to express so far. Anything more, Josh or Paki?
No, not for me, Mr. Chair. Just a quick reminder, please email me the dates that you're available to have working group number 2, please, if you wouldn't mind. We can't discuss it here, but if you would just email me with your availability, I'd appreciate it.
Good. Mary, I see your hand is still up.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I would like to hear more of what Patrick was saying at our next meeting, because it sounded like that foundation that he was talking about would be very interesting to at least know more about. I don't know if we have the capacity to do something similar, but I'd like to understand it better maybe. And the other thing is, Paki, did you send us something that we were supposed to respond to, and did I not respond to it? Sorry. That's
okay. I know there's a lot of emails right now, and I apologize. Things are moving really fast. So yeah, I'll re-forward it to all of you again. It's a little table with dates. I try to organize it. So
okay.
Yeah, if you guys could get back to me as soon as possible, it'd be great. We are filling up with dates over here. So thank you.
Okay, that's all for me.
Okay, thanks. I think the only committee member I haven't heard from today is Patricia. How are you feeling about things, Patricia?
Yeah, thanks for calling on me. I kind of have just been trying to wrap my head around this, and I think having a little bit more perspective, particularly hearing from Patrick, hopefully, or someone to talk about Move Tucson next meeting, and doing a little bit more research, I think, on my own will help me understand the best ways in which we can incorporate these seemingly, yeah, like I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around the fact that the goals, like what are the goals of the tool, if not to best predict outcomes? Like maybe a conversation like as a group about what exactly we want the tool to tell us, or what, yeah, kind of data we are looking to gather would be necessary, just because it seems like you could take it in a million different directions and look at a data point a million different ways. But I guess I'm just trying to sit with that and marinate on it, and hopefully have some more input next meeting. But
yeah, and I did mention earlier on, Patricia, that one of our upcoming steps is to go through our guiding principles and try to align those with the different columns in the tool that we saw, to see which ones perhaps we can relegate to background information, which are primary for what we're trying to evaluate, and then what's missing that we can add on either through other sources or through this kind of qualitative assessment as it's been described. So that's, I think, Josh, kind of something for next time as well. Mas.
Well, first off, I want to say also thank you, Paki, for sending out that table. I saw it and I apologize for not replying. I appreciate the different times and availability for that second and third meeting. One thing I would find, I really would like Patricia's ideas. I think would be helpful to kind of ground the committee in, or subcommittee rather, in what, or working group, whatever we are, in how we want to, what our goal is and what we think where we need to take it. And then I would really just appreciate if we had, pun intended, a roadmap of what is the timeline, what do we need to be doing, is there prep work, Josh, do you need us to go out and find data sets that seem to be available across the region and that we could use as inputs for certain things, or doing research that would be, what are the good proxies for these types of things that would address our goals? Is that something that is going to be an expectation from us? And maybe it is, maybe we come up with some ideas, but or how can we best prepare, and especially looking forward so that we have time. This was a very busy week with the holiday and stuff, and so it's just having some more of that runway, another transportation for lingo for you, to prepare would be very much appreciated by myself, and just to kind of see where we're going with it.
Yeah, I guess I'll jump in. Tom had mentioned, looking at the next meeting where Patrick would potentially share a little bit more about Move Tucson. I was going to try to say something silly about Patrick. Patrick and I built this, and Paul, we worked on this. Paul's with the county right now. For some reason, Catherine didn't let him come to this meeting. I'm not sure why. And so he iterated on this construct with the goals and policies of the Move Tucson. I think so. It'll be healthy to see that. It's similar in nature to what we've done, but clearly the goals policies align to different PMs, and so I think that crosswalk of the content that we have, I feel this is the best available information on many of these areas. We are the source of most of this information, as in PAG produces this, focuses on this, and delivers some of these key PMs. So I think looking where you have a little bit more background on what these performance measures are and the thresholds and that project level description, as I've kind of touched on in previous presentations with the full CAC, that's available in the platform with that project performance report. That would be a resource to look at to get a better understanding of what red, yellow, green means for each one of these. If you want a refresher on it, that's all at your fingertips. That executive summary breaks down what those metrics are, what those thresholds are. I think that next step is then identifying the gaps. Where can we, what of these can we assign to certain goals for the committee? And then where are some of those gaps, and how do we start filling them, and what could be good substitutes or whatever, what could be good data pieces to put in those gaps.
Yeah, very good. Mary.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I have a 4 o'clock meeting. I have to jump away. I don't know if that's going to change your quorum at all, but I have to pop out.
Thank you, Mary. We're still okay on quorum, but thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
All
right.
I gotta jump off too, so I'm gonna echo what Mary said. I got a hard 4 o'clock.
All right. Thanks a lot for your input today, Brian. Appreciate it.
I appreciate it. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Care.
Thanks. So just to kind of circle back on my ask, I think Josh, everything you said, that's really helpful to hear. I think having follow-up documentation about that is going to be helpful for members of this group, and also a timeline for us to work against? You know, is this something that we're going to do in the third meeting because we're going to talk in the second meeting about like grounding ourselves in what we're going to do next, and then the third meeting we are going to come in and, you know, do a deep dive in critiquing where we think the gaps are, what we think the weighted system is. Like, is that kind of where we're driving towards? And I just, for me personally, sorry if I'm the only one on the committee that like operates this way, but I like need to see that and have something to refer back to as far as that goes.
Good. We'll work on that, and I think it's a really good idea. I hope it's reasonable, realistic, I should say, to do that, because there are a lot of moving parts here, and I know we can go down a rabbit hole at almost any moment. And mess up our schedule. But I think it's a good idea to show us how we can possibly be finished with this by my goal, which is the second meeting of the CAC in October, to be able to make a presentation to the full committee and say, here's the basic tool. We still have all this stuff that is a group decision, as opposed to just our working group. But we've got it now in a position that we'd like to get your buy-in so that we can move forward evaluating these projects. Just a reminder, our committee here, our working group isn't tasked with determining the answers, just kind of the questions, kind of the format that's going to be used in answering those questions. But hopefully, we'll also have the most knowledge about the tool and can be, you know, a fuller internal, value partner to the rest of the committee, and be a resource that helps them.
And Tom, can I chime in one last? Patricia and Ava touched on the desire to see what's the outcome of a project, what's the impact, and we would love to be able to do that, but that doesn't exist. It not at this stage, and what that requires is a lot more work from the engineering, layout, and design. And so, unfortunately, those tools aren't. Or I would have delivered it. I would have put it together and had it at our fingertips. And so I think where we can get to some acceptance. I mean, you can look, and I'd love to get that input. But I just don't think that's available. And so what I think, if we can accept the value of what we do have, and this is going to, similar to what Patrick just shared with what their exercise was with City of Tucson. What is the potential for change? Are we going to be, can we identify we can identify where there are underperforming areas that we want to improve upon, and that is a strength of this. But we're not going to be able to, and so we're hoping through the next year-long exercise, there's a lot that goes into the project development. Once that project's defined, that the planners and the engineers and the community input that goes into that project is going to make sure it fulfills those goals or improve that performance. So I think it just at this stage, we don't have that, and we're kind of earlier on in the exercise and having that outcome based.
Yeah, and I think that's part of what we're going to hear back from these jurisdictional partners as well. What's their history of successfully addressing some of these deficiencies? Right. And are they trying new things? Is that what this is about now, or is this saying that we've addressed congestion before and it's been this way and it's been wildly successful, and so we continue to do it as policy? But somewhere in between is probably where the truth is in all of these areas, and understanding kind of that design level, not design of a project, but just what tools do they have that they can build into these projects?
So I guess, Josh, I keep getting confused about why we can't see even a proxy of the impact, because, I'm looking in the project review right now and I see the change of existing lanes to the proposed new lanes. And, also just like with the assumption of, or understanding, like, if it's going to be a new project and they're going to have to put in a sidewalk because ADA, right? So I guess I'm confused how some of those things cannot, I know it won't be a perfect picture, but couldn't be displayed and presented in this tool and saying that this will have this impact. This will also improve safety, maybe, because everything's going to, if it has no sidewalk currently, it's going to have a sidewalk, right? So I think, like, yeah, I get that it's not going to be totally perfect because of some of the details of the design,
Right.
but we can have a proxy for some of that information.
So I guess we kind of say this is the glass half empty that we fix, as opposed to, because we can't necessarily fully articulate, we're going to improve so many through these projects, miles of existing sidewalk. If you're really wanting to do improve sidewalk, that's more of a categorical, like that's, these are we can get at showing you the performance and how much of an impact you're going to have. We can do that, but it's basically showing by demonstrating that you are you're affecting poorly performing areas of the network based on your PMs, based on those performance measures. I'm sorry. Maybe we can talk about it further. We're well past 4 o'clock. I mean, the sketch planning tools that are out there are kind of for different later stages of the exercise. Okay, I guess maybe have me put it more explicitly. Those are more appropriate when there are a fewer set of projects, because they're going to take weeks of development individually for each project, as opposed to, hey, what's this higher level screening?
I guess I'm just struggling with that, in that there's like core guiding principles that the CAC approved, right, that are going to be contingent about this. So if we're saying we're going to prioritize based on this very specific, and I'm going to call it engineer-centric metrics rather than like regional need metrics, that is going to, that's that we're going to get a very specific set of projects from that aren't necessarily, we'll have like whittled down the list before really having enough information to holistically look at our guiding principles, is a concern that I have, and I'm trying to like bring up. So I just want to think about it that, and like, I really appreciate, like, you're so in the data and you have good data, and this is great. I just think that what I'm hearing is a lot of very traditional kind of systems of looking at it, and we just know that that's not how the world really works, right? And so I'm being that annoying person that is trying to encourage us to look in other places to say, how can we creatively embed that data, these other data inputs to just make better decisions that we know are going to make our region better for everyone in all, like, doesn't matter.
Let's do it.
Yeah, let's do it, Josh.
Sure. I mean, let's see how we can sort it out. I mean, that's part of the next step, right?
Yeah.
Yep. Agreed. All right. Thanks, everybody, for your participation. Thanks for the jurisdictional partners that joined us. Great input, and appreciate it very much. And everybody go fill out the preference info that Paki's requested, so that we can get our next couple meetings scheduled and get down to it. So at that, I am going to declare us adjourned. Thanks, everyone.